Hi, it's Kim from the Shamrock Quilt Studio. You're on the other side of the studio today seeing what goes on literally behind the scenes. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. We're going to be starting a new project in August, and I'm trying to get the fabric ready. Don't mind me, I'm just going to keep on while we talk. This is the fabric that we're going to be using for our strip piecing project, and it is a solid white fabric, and we're also going to be using a deep royal blue fabric. So they're lots of contrast in here. But because there's so much contrast, we wanted to make sure that that blue is not going to bleed onto the white the first time we throw it in the washing machine. So I pre-washed it. Now I want to tell you a little bit about how I pre-washed that. I put the blue fabric by itself into the washer, and I washed it with warm water. I typically don't use hot water with anything that I wash, so I wasn't really concerned about that. But I washed it in hot water with regular detergent, and once it was finished spinning, I left it in the machine and I ran it again, this time again on warm water. I put in one color catcher, not a whole box, just one, and ran it. And once it was finished, I checked that color catcher, and it was only very, very slightly tinted blue. Not a whole bunch of blue. So at that point, I was pretty confident that it's not going to bleed very much. If I had taken that color catcher out and it had a lot of color on it, then I would have washed it another time or two. I don't think you can see me unless I get right over here. I tried not to have to move a whole lot of things to be able to do this. Okay, so then we've washed it. I washed the white one time because it's not going to throw off any dye, or it shouldn't. I guess there might be cases where it was dyed white on top of something, but we've got a solid white fabric here. Now, I've got 5 yards of this I'm trying to manage. So I'm trying to go around the outside edge of the fabric, and I'm using my steam iron. And if you notice, I am ironing. I'm not pressing. I'm actually ironing. I'm moving that iron and using the steam to try to get out as many wrinkles as I can. And that will help us when we cut these strip pieces so that they are even and we're not getting a wonky edge because we've got wrinkles. Now, I've got most of the edges done. Let me see if I can get some of the centerpiece. I am probably going to iron this once today, and I may come back later in the day when it gets a little bit cooler and iron it again. And either that time or the third time, I'll be using some spray starch. And it just really kind of depends on how many wrinkles we still have left after that second iron. It's actually doing pretty well. Sometimes you'll run into a fabric that just doesn't like to be ironed, and you can't get it to release those wrinkles. I don't put any fabric softener in anything that I quilt. There could be a need for a fabric softener after the quilt is made. But I don't even know that I've come across that. Maybe if you were giving it to a baby. But then I'd be concerned about the smells and the chemicals in it. I think if anything, I'd probably put a little bit of vinegar in it to see if that wouldn't soften it a bit. But usually at my house, it's just wash. For quilts, it's wash and dry and throw them back on where they were. If I've got to take a lot of care with something, every time I wash it, it's probably not staying long. And if you run into a situation where you're having to wash a quilt a lot, just know that it's not going, if you're washing it every week, for example, it's not going to last as long. It's like any other textile you have. Every time you wash it, that's wear on the fabric. And we think about the old antique and vintage quilts that we see. Just remember that in the times that those were made, there were no washing machines and dryers, most likely. Everything was washed by hand or maybe a wringer washer. It was a lot of work to iron something, so it better be dirty before you washed it. And they were dried, hanging up outside or inside on some kind of rack. So they just weren't laundered as much as we may do in modern times. I find too, if you're sleeping with quilts on your bed, this may be a little personal, but I would always recommend that you use sheets, a top sheet between you and the quilt. That will keep your quilt cleaner. And I don't think you'll have to wash it as often. Now I know this is terribly exciting. It's almost like watching paint dry. But it is one of those things that has to be done. And it could be that you know exactly how to do what I'm doing. Or it could be that you've never seen an iron before in your life. But this has been ironed now one time with just a steam iron. Whoops, I'm caught up. And I'm going to get some scissors and cut all this thread, the raveling from the ends, so that we have a reasonably clean edge. And then I am going to fold it lengthwise the way it was in the store when I bought it. And we will iron it again and probably spray starch it at that time. Thanks for sticking with me and watching this very exciting video from the other side of the camera in the Shamrock Quilt Studio. And we'll see you next time. Be sure to like us, subscribe to our channel. Have a great week.